Welcome to Neural Sparks, a crackling series of 3-minute intellectual lightning bolts that fire across the minds of giants. Each episode is a brain-tingling glimpse into the ideas that changed the world and the ones still being written in real time. From the paradoxes of Wittgenstein to the neural nets of Geoffrey Hinton, from the integrative visions of Ken Wilber to the computational cosmos of Stephen Wolfram, this series doesn't just inform, it ignites. We leap boldly and briskly through the worlds of physics, computer science, philosophy, mathematics, technology, ethics, and the art of creative thinking, with each spark calibrated for clarity, wonder, and just the right touch of wit. Structured across 10 distinct books, each with 10 episodes, Neural Sparks is your mental espresso shot, sharp, stimulating, and unexpectedly addictive. Think of it as a philosophical power nap, a lab meeting with the universe, or an intellectual tapas bar where every bite packs a punch. Whether you're here to muse, marvel, or just make your neurons dance, these are the sparks that light the circuits of tomorrow. Charge your mind, 3 minutes at a time. Neural Sparks, where brilliant thoughts catch fire. John C. Lilly was a man who lived on the frontier of science, of consciousness, and sometimes of sanity itself. Born in 1915, he began his career in the traditional world of medicine and neurophysiology, studying the brain with a zeal that marked him early as a pioneer. Yet, conventional paths never satisfied Lilly. Beneath his white lab coat beat the heart of a true explorer, someone who wanted not just to map the human mind, but to voyage into it. In the 1950s, Lilly created one of his most revolutionary tools, the sensory deprivation tank. It was, in essence, a windowless pod filled with salt water, heated to skin temperature, in which a person could float in total darkness and silence, free from the constant bombardment of sensory input. Lilly's initial goal was scientific, to find out what would happen to the brain when stripped of all external stimuli. Would consciousness drift into chaos? Would the mind, untethered from the senses, simply shut down? The results astonished him, and the world. Instead of blankness or disintegration, Lilly and his subjects, often himself, reported vivid, elaborate journeys inward. Freed from the ordinary tether of the body, the mind seemed to blossom, spinning rich narratives, visions, and profound emotional experiences. What began as a physiological experiment quickly veered into the realms of psychology, mysticism, and the nature of reality itself. Lilly's tanks became laboratories for deep exploration of inner space. He meticulously recorded his experiences, noting how the absence of sensory input amplified access to hidden aspects of the psyche. Some sessions produced stark clinical observations. Others, especially as Lilly began to introduce mind-altering substances like LSD into the mix, turned surreal. Conversations with non-human intelligences, encounters with entities he described as part of the Earth Coincidence Control Office, and glimpses of parallel realities. His work profoundly influenced later thinkers in psychology, meditation, and even computer science. Meanwhile, deprivation tanks, renamed float tanks, found their way into therapy, sports training, and even popular wellness culture, promising mental clarity, stress relief, and creative breakthroughs. Yet Lilly himself remained a controversial figure, alternately revered as a daring mind explorer and criticized for pushing beyond the boundaries of scientific rigor into speculative, even fantastical territory. John Lilly's life was an experiment in its own right. Francis Crick is best remembered for co-discovering the double helix structure of DNA, a revelation that forever changed biology. But Crick's intellectual journey did not end with that singular triumph. Restless, curious, and fiercely ambitious, Crick spent the second half of his life pursuing what he considered an even deeper mystery: the nature of human consciousness. Born in 1916 in Northampton, England, Crick displayed an early aptitude for science. After contributing to British wartime research on radar during World War II, he turned to biology, convinced that the greatest mysteries lay within the machinery of life itself. Alongside James Watson, Crick unraveled the structure of DNA in 1953, a discovery that illuminated how genetic information is stored and transmitted across generations. Yet even as accolades flooded in, Crick remained unsatisfied. He once confessed, "What is the soul but the workings of the brain?" In his mind, understanding DNA was only the beginning of understanding life, and life's greatest riddle was consciousness. In the 1970s, Crick pivoted his focus, leaving molecular biology behind. He spent his later years at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California, dedicating himself to neuroscience. His mission was audacious: to explain how the brain produces the subjective experience of being alive, the vivid inner movie of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. Crick approached consciousness with the same boldness he had brought to genetics, proposing that the solution lay not in vague philosophy, but in the hard science of neurons and circuits. He believed that consciousness was a product of specific biological processes, particularly tied to visual awareness. In collaboration with neuroscientist Christoph Koch, Crick proposed that certain synchronized patterns of neural firing, especially in the 40 Hz range, were key to binding sensory information into a unified conscious experience. This binding problem fascinated him: how the brain integrates color, shape, motion, and meaning into a single perception rather than a meaningless jumble. Crick's 1994 book, The Astonishing Hypothesis, provocatively argued that you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. To many, this reductionist view was controversial, even unsettling. But to Crick, it was a profound scientific challenge, worthy of a lifetime's effort. Until his death in 2004, Francis Crick remained the eternal explorer, refusing to rest on his laurels. Charles Darwin was not a man of thunderous proclamations, but of quiet, dogged observation. Born on February 12, 1809, in Shrewsbury, England, Darwin seemed destined for a conventional life, first as a doctor, then perhaps as a clergyman. Yet the steady beat of curiosity thudded louder than any professional expectation. His fateful voyage aboard HMS Beagle in 1831 changed everything. As the ship charted the coasts of South America and the Galapagos Islands, Darwin collected fossils, sketched exotic creatures, and noted the small but striking differences between species across isolated islands. These observations gnawed at his mind, demanding explanation. Back in England, Darwin withdrew from the public eye, pouring himself into decades of research, correspondence, and relentless thinking. He bred pigeons. He studied barnacles for 8 laborious years. He read the economist Thomas Malthus, who argued that populations grow faster than their food supplies, leading inevitably to competition and struggle. Here, Darwin found the vital clue. In nature, not every creature survives to reproduce. Those with slight advantages, sharper beaks, swifter legs, keener eyes, were more likely to endure and pass on their traits. Over vast stretches of time, these tiny advantages accumulated, sculpting new species altogether. He called this grand mechanism natural selection. Darwin hesitated to publish, fearing both scientific ridicule and societal backlash. The Victorian world, steeped in religious belief, was not ready to hear that life evolved without divine intervention. But in 1858, when Alfred Russel Wallace, working independently in the Malay archipelago, sent Darwin an essay outlining nearly the same theory, Darwin was spurred to act. The two men's findings were presented jointly, but it was Darwin's 1859 book on the origin of species that exploded into public consciousness. Darwin's argument was elegant, and to those willing to see it, undeniable. Nature selects. Species are not immutable, they are dynamic, ever shifting in response to the pressures of their environments. His work unleashed a storm. Some hailed him as a visionary, others denounced him as a heretic. Darwin bore the controversy with characteristic humility, retreating to his beloved Down House to continue his experiments on plants, worms, and all manner of living things. In the end, Darwin transformed how humanity sees itself, not as separate from nature, but deeply enmeshed in it. Of all the great adventurers of science, few led a life as daring and as strangely overlooked as Alfred Russel Wallace. Born in 1823 into a struggling English family, Wallace's early life was shaped by poverty and an insatiable hunger for knowledge. Without the luxury of a formal university education, he taught himself through voracious reading, long walks through the countryside, and correspondence with fellow naturalists. His passion for understanding the diversity of life eventually led him to South America and then the Malay archipelago, where the real story of his greatness unfolded. In the tropics, Wallace faced fever, shipwrecks, and near starvation. Yet it was there, amid the lush rainforests and teeming islands, that he made one of the most profound discoveries in the history of science. Carefully observing the wildly different species on neighboring islands, he began to realize that living things were not fixed and immutable, as tradition claimed. Instead, species changed, slowly, gradually, adapting to their environments. The mechanism, he deduced, was natural selection. Individuals best suited to survive would pass their traits to the next generation, shaping the course of evolution over millennia. In 1858, while laid low with malaria on the remote island of Ternate, Wallace penned an essay outlining his revolutionary theory. Believing Charles Darwin a kindred spirit, he mailed the manuscript to him for feedback. What Wallace could not have known was that Darwin, after 2 decades of private study and hesitation, had independently reached the same conclusions. Darwin was thunderstruck, and, to his credit, he and his friends arranged for both Wallace's paper and Darwin's own work to be presented jointly to the Linnean Society of London. Thus, Wallace's brilliance helped precipitate the publication of On the Origin of Species the following year. Despite his pivotal role, Wallace remained a man of remarkable humility. He continued his scientific work, exploring topics from biogeography, in which he identified the famous Wallace Line, dividing Asian and Australian species, to anthropology and conservation. He warned against the reckless destruction of the natural world, becoming one of the first advocates for environmental protection. Even as spiritualism captured his imagination later in life, Wallace's commitment to scientific integrity never wavered. History often casts Darwin as the sole father of evolution, but the true story is richer and more adventurous. Without Wallace, the fearless naturalist who saw the hand of natural selection in the flutter of a butterfly's wing or the leap of a tree frog. John von Neumann was a man who seemed to exist half a century ahead of his time. Born in Budapest in 1903, he was a child prodigy, able to divide 8-digit numbers in his head and converse in ancient Greek by the age of 6. His brilliance first flourished in pure mathematics, but destiny had more ambitious plans. By the 1930s, he had immigrated to the United States, joining the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, where he worked alongside Albert Einstein and Kurt Gödel, carving his place among the intellectual titans of the century. It was during World War II, however, that von Neumann's mind turned decisively toward applied science. Recruited for the Manhattan Project, he contributed to the mathematics of nuclear implosion, but an even deeper legacy was quietly taking shape. In studying how best to simulate explosive shock waves, von Neumann encountered the limitations of the mechanical calculators of his day. He realized that future progress, scientific, military, and even philosophical, would depend on machines that could think faster and adapt their instructions dynamically. Thus was born his vision for the electronic computer, a leap beyond mere mechanical calculation. In 1945, von Neumann drafted the first draft of a report on the EDVAC, a document that would become the blueprint for modern computers. In it, He laid out a revolutionary architecture, the stored program concept. Rather than hardwiring specific tasks into machines, von Neumann proposed that both data and the programs operating on them should reside together in memory, allowing computers to modify their own instructions and thus perform a limitless variety of tasks. This von Neumann architecture underpins virtually every computer built to this day. He did not simply theorize, he helped bring his ideas to life. At the Institute for Advanced Study, he led the construction of one of the first programmable digital computers. Tirelessly cross-pollinating fields, von Neumann foresaw not just the power of computation, but its philosophical consequences. He speculated about self-replicating automata, the theoretical basis for later concepts like artificial life and nanotechnology. In his final years, even as cancer consumed him, von Neumann worked feverishly on the intersection of computers, mathematics, biology, and consciousness, believing that the human brain itself might one day be understood through computational principles. John von Neumann's computer work was not a mere invention, it was the opening of a new epoch. He helped create the thinking machines that now permeate our world. In the small Prussian town of Königsberg, where the streets seemed to run on clockwork and the seasons ruled the mood of its people, lived a man whose mind would quietly but profoundly shift the course of human thought: Immanuel Kant. Born in 1724 to a modest, devout family, Kant grew up steeped in religious discipline, but with a restless curiosity that could not be confined to dogma. By the time he reached adulthood, he had devoted his life to a single question that gnawed at the core of philosophy. How do we know what we know? Kant's early work moved carefully within the traditions of rationalism and empiricism, but he saw their limits. Rationalists like Descartes insisted that reason alone gave us knowledge. Empiricists like Locke argued it all came from experience. Kant believed both were partly right and partly blind. In his breakthrough masterpiece, Critique of Pure Reason, 1781, he proposed a radical new synthesis. The mind is not just a passive recipient of experience, but an active participant in shaping it. Kant argued that there are certain structures, categories like space, time, causality, that the mind brings to experience. These are not learned through experience, they are the conditions that make experience possible at all. Thus, what we perceive is never the thing in itself, das Ding in sich, but always the world as it appears to us, through the lens of human cognition. Reality is filtered through a human framework, and pure knowledge of things beyond that framework is forever out of reach. This stunning move, known as his Copernican revolution in philosophy, repositioned the human mind from being a mirror of nature to being a co-creator of experience. Epistemology was no longer simply about gathering facts from the world. It became a study of how the mind's own faculties structure all possible knowledge. Kant believed this insight was essential for grounding science, morality, and even metaphysics on secure foundations. Despite his reclusive life and meticulous daily routine, he was said to walk the streets so punctually that neighbors could set their clocks by him. Kant's thought reached far beyond Königsberg. He opened a new era in philosophy, inspiring German idealists, challenging theologians, influencing scientists, and unsettling anyone who had once thought knowledge was simple or direct. Kant died in 1804, nearly blind but inwardly luminous, having charted the invisible architecture of human understanding. Werner Heisenberg was born in 1901 in Würzburg, Germany, a prodigy whose curiosity about nature was as limitless as the quantum world he would one day define. Growing up amid the intellectual fervor of early 20th century Germany, Heisenberg showed brilliance early, diving into advanced mathematics and physics while still a teenager. Under the mentorship of Max Born at Göttingen, he soon found himself standing on the edge of a revolution. The world of atoms was not what Newtonian mechanics had long assumed. By the mid-1920s, the old certainties of classical physics were unraveling. Heisenberg, restless and bold, proposed something radical in 1925, a version of quantum mechanics based only on what could be observed, not on invisible orbits of electrons, but on measurable quantities like light emission frequencies. Working through feverish calculations, he formulated matrix mechanics, a bizarre but astonishingly accurate way of predicting atomic behavior. Yet it was in 1927 that Heisenberg delivered his most famous and perhaps most profound insight, the uncertainty principle. In the shadow of Copenhagen, alongside Niels Bohr, he realized a deep and unsettling truth about nature. There were fundamental limits to what could be known. The more precisely one measures a particle's position, the less precisely one can know its momentum, and vice versa. It wasn't a technological flaw or human error. Uncertainty was built into the fabric of reality itself. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle shattered the old dream of perfect knowledge. In the quantum realm, determinism gave way to probabilities. Nature was not a neat clockwork machine, but a flickering web of possibilities. His idea not only revolutionized physics, but also sent ripples into philosophy, forcing thinkers to reconsider the very meaning of reality. Awarded the Nobel Prize in 1932 for his contributions to quantum mechanics, Heisenberg went on to a complex, sometimes controversial career, including work on Germany's nuclear projects during World War II. After the war, he helped rebuild scientific research in a devastated Europe, becoming a figure of reconciliation and reflection. Through it all, the core of Heisenberg's work remained a profound reminder. Reality resists total conquest. The uncertainty principle stands as a testament to humility in science, a recognition that the deeper we peer into the heart of matter, the more mystery we find. Werner Heisenberg, the quiet revolutionary, taught humanity that limits to knowledge are not a failure of science, but a fundamental feature of existence itself. William James, often called the father of American psychology, was a man haunted by the mystery of consciousness. Born in 1842 into an intellectually vibrant family, his brother being the novelist Henry James, William's early life was marked by frequent moves across Europe and an education as eclectic as it was elite. Though he trained first as a painter and then as a physician, James's true calling was philosophy and the workings of the human mind. In his early 30s, James was nearly paralyzed by depression. He questioned the existence of free will, feared insanity, and pondered suicide. Yet this inner turmoil gave birth to one of his most defining ideas, that belief could shape reality. "My first act of free will," he wrote, "shall be to believe in free will." It was a personal epiphany, but it would later become a foundation of pragmatism, a philosophy that judged ideas by their practical effects. James's most enduring legacy lies in his revolutionary 1890 book, The Principles of Psychology. Here, he offered a rich, phenomenological account of consciousness, famously describing it as a stream, not a chain of discrete thoughts, but a continuous flow. "Consciousness," he wrote, "does not appear to itself chopped up in bits. It is nothing jointed, it flows." This metaphor transformed how we think about awareness, emphasizing unity, subjectivity, and change. His fascination with altered states led him to experiments with nitrous oxide, through which he glimpsed what he called the subliminal self. He proposed that our waking consciousness is just one special type, and that beyond it lie vast ranges of mental life. He wasn't afraid to wade into spiritual waters. In the varieties of religious experience, he explored mysticism, conversion, and faith, not as delusions, but as data. Consciousness, for James, was plural and expansive, not just a product of brain chemistry, but a portal to deeper meaning. As a professor at Harvard, James was magnetic. His lectures blurred the lines between science, philosophy, and poetry. He influenced thinkers from John Dewey to Carl Jung, and even modern cognitive science owes him a debt. Yet James remained modest. He once described truth not as something absolute, but as something made, a process that happens as ideas prove themselves in experience. In the end, William James died in 1910, still chasing the mystery of the mind. But he left behind a vision of consciousness as something lived, fluid, and profound, less a thing to be measured than a world to be explored. In the quiet village of Ockham in Surrey, England, a boy named William was born around 1287. Though humble in origin, his mind would carve one of the most enduring principles in intellectual history. Raised in a time of scholastic entanglement, where theologians and philosophers built vast, elaborate systems to explain the world, William of Ockham stood out for his insistence on clarity, economy, and restraint. He would become a Franciscan friar, a philosopher, a logician, and the father of a principle now known as Occam's razor. William's early studies brought him to Oxford, where he began to challenge the grand metaphysical schemes of thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus. To Occam, their complex hierarchies of forms, essences, and divine intermediaries were not explanations, but obfuscations. He believed that explanations should never multiply causes or assumptions unnecessarily. In his words, entities must not be multiplied beyond necessity. Intia non sunt multiplicanda praeter necessitatem. This razor-sharp idea, Occam's razor, was not just a critique of theology, but a revolutionary philosophical method. It wasn't about rejecting the divine. It was about asserting that simpler explanations, when sufficient, should be preferred. He applied this to language, universals, logic, and even to politics, writing boldly in defense of the separation of church and state, an act that nearly cost him his life. Fleeing papal persecution, he spent his later years in exile under the protection of the Holy Roman Emperor. But his razor endured. Centuries later, scientists would wield it to strip away superstition and conjecture. When Copernicus proposed the heliocentric model, when Newton formulated his laws of motion, and when Darwin conceived natural selection, each appealed, consciously or not, to the principle of simplicity. Not because simplicity guarantees truth, but because it keeps us honest. It reminds us that the burden of proof lies with complexity, not clarity. Today, Occam's razor remains a cornerstone of scientific reasoning. From quantum physics to machine learning, researchers use it to prefer parsimonious models, the ones that explain the most with the least. William of Ockham, the friar with the fewest assumptions, could never have imagined neural networks or string theory. But he would have understood the impulse, to cut through the noise and glimpse the truth with as little clutter as possible. In an age still prone to overcomplication, Occam's legacy is a blade of discernment, sharp, enduring, and timeless. In the late 4th century, a restless and brilliant young man wandered the streets of Carthage, caught between ambition and despair. His name was Augustine, born in 354 in the North African town of Thagast, the son of a pagan father and a devout Christian mother, Monica. From an early age, Augustine displayed a fierce intellect and a craving for truth, but he also burned with worldly desire. He pursued pleasures and rhetorical fame, indulging in carnal relationships and embracing the fashionable philosophy of Manichaeism, a dualistic religion that promised an explanation for the problem of evil but left his soul dry. Augustine became a celebrated orator in Milan, admired for his eloquence, but inside he was tormented. The deeper he looked into himself, the more dissonance he felt between his outer brilliance and inner emptiness. His mother followed him tirelessly, praying and weeping for his conversion. In Milan, Augustine encountered Bishop Ambrose, a man whose intellect and faith challenged his assumptions. For the first time, Augustine saw Christianity not as superstition, but as a profound philosophy of the soul. The breaking point came in a garden. Tormented by guilt, desire, and confusion, he cried out, "How long, O Lord, how long?" Then he heard a childlike voice sing, "Take and read." He opened a Bible to Romans 13:13 to 14, a passage calling him to abandon revelry and clothe himself in Christ. In that instant, a flood of peace washed over him. The man who had sought truth in pleasure and prestige now surrendered to God. Augustine was baptized by Ambrose in 387. He returned to North Africa, became a priest, then Bishop of Hippo, and began crafting a legacy of Christian thought. His Confessions, written around 400 AD, is both autobiography and philosophical meditation, a radical work for its time. In it, Augustine recounts his sins not to glorify them, but to show the depths from which grace can lift a soul. It is the first real introspective autobiography in Western literature, a tapestry of memory, guilt, longing, and divine love. In the Confessions, Augustine turns the soul inside out, offering readers a mirror. His conversion is not a simple change of belief, but a profound turning of the heart, a lifelong pilgrimage toward the light. His story, immortalized in that book, continues to speak to every seeker who wrestles with desire, meaning, and the call of God.